Hey everyone, it's Zach with Palantir Research. Palantir's stock price is flying today after even a decent 8% gain on the previous day. I do not follow the stock usually on a daily basis, but wanted to cover why this might be happening and what are my thoughts on all of this. Well, let's look at the facts first historically. The closest Palantir got to this kind of activity volume-wise and price action-wise on the positive side is last earnings for Q4 2022, which took place on February 13th. We did see a small rally there hitting the 10s, but dropping back down and hovering around the 7s and 8s again throughout that time in between. If we want to look further back when they broke through 11, we have to go all the way back a good 9 to 10 months to August of 2022, which is when they released their Q2 2022 earnings. So at least for these large spikes in volume, we see Palantir move around the time they release earnings, which isn't surprising because most companies they do as they release their financials and give tidbits about how their business is doing and where they're going. Also, an important factor is that this is when institutional buyers make decisions to start purchasing or selling stocks based on earnings performance, plus those tidbits I was talking about. With their amount of money, price movements will be inevitable, especially for companies the size of Palantir. So at least for now, we know on the institutional side, all the articles coming out about Cathie Woods buying $43 million of shares after earnings and an additional $13 million of shares more recently to add to her position has already played a role in this. This combined with investor excitement around AI and GAAP profitability, it almost creates a perfect storm of euphoria around the stock currently. If that's a good thing or a bad thing though, I'll leave that up to you. But what I think will be more interesting and the next opportunity for investors to continue monitoring is the 13F filings for all large funds to see how they move on Palantir post-earnings. The latest data we got from the first quarter of 2023 is still out of date since it took place before Palantir's latest earnings, but we still have valuable data up to 3/31/2023. So you'll be able to see who's buying and selling and hodling. When the 6/30/2023 data is out though, we can see how this has changed in either the positive or negative direction, which is ultimately more useful for investors because the velocity of this institutional ownership ticker moving is much more important to look at over time. Just looking at the current summary, we know that Palantir has a smaller institutional ownership percentage compared to other more established companies with consistent GAAP earnings. This is to be expected right now as they were previously GAAP unprofitable and experienced much slower revenue growth than when they first guided for at their DPO. So I'm curious to see how this will change once we get new data because with a second consecutive quarter of GAAP profitability and being in a different financial environment than the 2020s and 2021, and all on top of management's confidence and guidance towards future quarters and full-year GAAP profitability, it wouldn't be surprising to see more smart money attempt to build a position here. I'm not saying this is the end-all be-all with everyone piling in and holding forever with Palantir going to the moon. Especially as a long-term investor, I like to see steady progress because we've seen when smart money piles into something, it also has the effect of them all jumping ship at the same time if something were to go wrong. And this will decimate not only the price, but also the volume, which creates a trickle-down effect onto retail investors. So what are my thoughts today though on all of this? Remember, this is my personal take as a longer-term investor where I hold stocks for years. When it comes to price, I like to take everything with a grain of salt, especially since I try to avoid looking at the price of my stocks on a daily basis, but rather care more about their quarterly financials since these are not as fleeting as market sentiment. I'm boring. Put money aside into my retirement target date funds, and I'll own a few individual companies I truly have the time to do deep dives for and research about with strong conviction with the risk allocation to reflect that. Now, if I were to go off intuition and past experience, this definitely feels different than the last price run up back in February, where we almost immediately saw after a few days the price just go back to its normal range. Now, I'm not saying that cannot happen for this one too, but the circumstances are definitely different macro-wise and for Palantir as a company. Especially on a macro scale, inflation has some expectations of tapering, especially since our baseline already rose up so high last year, plus the Fed, even if raising rates are at a 0.25 basis points rise, consistently, instead of at the February time a few months ago, where we were just starting to experience that decrease coming down from 0.75 to 0.5 and to eventually 0.25. Things are very different than they were back in February. For Palantir as a company, profitability feels almost guaranteed at this point. Palantir's cash pile is getting a guaranteed 4 to 5% return on treasuries. Stock-based compensation continues to trend down, even though it is still high in my opinion, but doesn't ruin the long-term thesis. S&P inclusion in goals for the management, and artificial intelligence is still the big narrative today across the whole market. And don't get me started on geopolitical events. There's too many to count in favor currently for Palantir, at least blocking the things that a lot of people are thinking about that may be negative for them. But like I said, as a longer term investor, quarterly movements in price for me are just part of the game. If it flies up to 15, 20, or down to 6, 7, 8, even 5, I have no reason to sell right now if the financials don't drastically veer off course, and I expect this company to be around and thrive for 10 to 15, 20 years. I mean, there's no danger of bankruptcy, of course, with their cash and treasuries and cash flow. Also, I'm not a trader. I don't need to watch short-term price movements or maximize buying and selling transactions, especially since, for myself, emotionally it's easy to buy and hold. I read quarterly reports and I like to see trends over several quarters, or more valuably to me, over years, which we have gotten to now. And I've experienced plenty of upward and downward price movement on this stock in my position for years, where I've actually been holding the stock much longer before I started posting videos about this. I won't go into details because I've already documented this fully on all those transactions in one of my first videos on my full Palantir position, so check that out if you're actually interested in the details and what I own and at how much. And note, this has not actually changed at all since I've made that. But basically, it's just another day for me, but glad to see other investors gain some excitement, especially at those very low cost bases. And remember, this is all personal and everyone's goals investing are differently, so just because I'm a longer term investor doesn't mean that you cannot do things in the short term for yourself, or if you can even hold things longer than me. But let me know your thoughts below, and I'll see you in the next video.